With respect to Trump's indictment, we talked about it largely from a First Amendment perspective, as well as Supreme Court precedent with respect to presidential powers, the Nixon v. Fitzgerald case that indemnifies a president from civil and criminal liability taken in actions consistent with the execution of his office. But Alan Dershowitz, of course, famed Harvard law professor,
Been
uh,
on the show many times.
been on our show many times. He had a bit of a different take on it too, just in terms of the standard of uh, evidence that's required to prosecute your chief political opponent in a free society. That's sort of where he went in discussing this and all of the indictments. First, the January 6th indictment.
Not strong enough or specific enough to satisfy the very high standard that's required when a president of the United States allows his Justice Department to indict his opponent and influence the outcome of the election. That is such a serious matter that it can't be based on vague conspiratorial notions, proof of intent beyond a reasonable doubt. No, this is a charge that will result in a conviction in the District of Columbia, because just as a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, a jury, a petty jury in the District of Columbia, will certainly convict somebody named Donald Trump, as long as the evidence is plausible. But it doesn't satisfy the high standard that should be required when you're going after your political opponent. That's banana republic, when you go after your political opponent by indicting them.
So that's on January 6th. You know, the Banana Republic characterization invoked, not unique. Then Dershowitz's summation on all the indictments to present, with one still pending.
No, he wasn't treated fairly. Now, we have to see whether the obstruction charge sticks. It's based apparently on triple hearsay. I've read the indictment. It doesn't say that Donald Trump himself told an eye or ear witness to erase videotapes. Apparently, there were no erased videotapes. All the videotapes were turned over. So that obstruction charge seems to be based on triple hearsay. But we'll wait and see how it uncovers and develops. The charge itself of classified material doesn't meet the standard of same justice for all, because it doesn't seem all that different from the allegations made against other people of the Democratic Party. So far, I've seen nothing that warrants prosecuting the man who is now in a 44-44 poll tie with the incumbent president and trying to influence the outcome of the election through prosecution. To do that, the standard has to be so high, like in the Nixon case. I don't think it was met here.
David Rifkin and Lee Casey practice appellate constitutional law in Washington, D.C. They had an op-ed in the Journal about the January 6th indictment of Trump, and that it imperils the presidency, not his presidency, the presidency, writing, Trump's conduct may be hard to defend, but the stakes here are far greater than his fate. One can easily envision a future president using military force, sending weapons to another country, engaging in a major diplomatic endeavor, or authorizing a prosecution based on what opponents believe, perhaps rightly, are self-serving lies. Under Mr. Smith's theory, he could be charged with defrauding the United States. The specter of such prosecutions would cripple the ability of all future presidents to perform their constitutional responsibilities vigorously and fearlessly. That's why we have presidential immunity in the first place. But, you know, when you're dealing with the ends justify the means crowd, we just have to get what we want now. No consideration for future implications. We'll deal with future implications when they're realized. For more on this and other matters, pleased to be joined by Ken Cuccinelli. He's the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. He's also a former attorney general for the state of Virginia, and he's affiliated with a DeSantis super PAC, a super PAC supporting Ron DeSantis in the presidential race. Ken, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you guys.
So you're a constitutional scholar, attorney, former attorney general as well here. So we need you to weigh in on this. What's your perspective, particularly on the January 6th indictment?
It reads basically like an impeachment bill, not a criminal indictment. and they already did that twice with Donald Trump. I agree with Dershowitz's comments on the prior. I would say that Trump has 2.5 BS indictments. The half that isn't is the obstruction, basically the cover-up. It's the cover-up's worse than the crime. And Dershowitz touched on the videos. There's also lying to 3 different lawyers in order to certify things to a grand jury that were not true. So those are the non-BS charges, but the entire J6 indictment is just baloney. I was in front of that grand jury twice. The first time I ended up arguing with one of the grand jurors. The second time I had it out with the prosecutor in front of the grand jury. And basically what the prosecutor and I argued over is what they ended up charging. I said, you are trying to criminalize a difference of a legal theory, and you don't like the legal theory, but it's not an illegitimate legal theory. It's not made up, and you don't get to do that. Well, they can at least charge it, so I wasn't right about that.
Well,
they shouldn't be able to prevail.
That must have been a moment, though, but you arguing with, was it Jack Smith or somebody else before the grand jury? That must have been interesting for the grand jurors to the extent they were not asleep.
No, and 3/4 of them were wearing masks in January of 2023. What that might tell you.
There you go.
No, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
I
know.
Yeah, we believe you.
Roll my dang eyes. I'm like, are you kidding me? And look, you noted I've started a super PAC for DeSantis. I am not anti-Trump. I'm for DeSantis because he's better at almost everything. And a lot of this trouble is self-made by Trump. That doesn't mean it should be criminally charged,
right.
But he sure does give them softballs to hit. And DeSantis doesn't do that. He hits the other side softballs out of the park. That's it is a factor for me.
So the judge today, appointed by Obama, she's been very hard on January 6 suspects who've, she's harsh with the sentencing. Do you think she's going to detain Trump on pretrial detention?
No.
There's no way.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No. And I think there's a decent chance this case gets moved down to the district the president lives in currently. Decent chance.
Oh, really? You think he could get a change of venue? Based on,
I think it's possible.
Based on what would be the legal argument?
The legal argument would be kind of standard stuff, but the reason the judge would do it, might do it, is yes, she's been tough on J6 people and so forth, but the reality is you don't have to be smarter than a box of rocks to realize what will happen in D.C. and that it won't be a legitimate outcome. It won't be perceived as a legitimate outcome by the rest of America. If you want a legitimate outcome, you have to have a legitimate trial. And it's already BS charges, as we've already talked about. But at least get it in front of a real jury instead of a foregone conclusion.
Well,
so that's why I think that's possible.
Wow. Well, that ascribes a level of equanimity that is very optimistic.
No, yes. I just told you possible.
Yeah,
I
understand.
And you can say whatever you want about the judge, but she's not dumb. And this has bigger implications, much bigger implications. And I would suggest that that judge can see that what I just said is true. Whether she therefore acts on it will be another question entirely. We will see. That's where your equanimity comment comes into play, and we'll see.
Yeah.
But
there's already a lot
I'd
of
be remiss if I didn't spend some of this time pointing out that Ron DeSantis he's the only person in America who's removed a Soros prosecutor. He is actually cleaning up the part of these systems within his reach. Donald Trump helped build these systems. He hired Christopher Wray, and now he complains about Christopher Wray. He hired Mark Milley. He gave Fauci an award going out the door. I was there as deputy secretary, as you guys know, in DHS. I fought his appointees to try to achieve his agenda as much as I fought the left. He wasn't good at this, and I'm sorry people don't like to hear that. He's a hell of a showman, but there's very little preparation and very little follow-through. I did appreciate that he frequently made good decisions, but when your follow-through on something, an example I use sometimes is to make a particular visa situation, the H-1B, these tech visas that displace middle-class Americans. Companies don't pay Social Security and Medicare taxes on those people, and the president finally agreed with me, yeah, okay, let's do that. So his way of getting that done was, Ken, go tell Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, to do it, because it's a tax issue. Treasury had to do it. Well, I couldn't even get him on the phone. And, I let the president know that, and he didn't do anything about it. That's Donald Trump follow-through. That is, you compare that to DeSantis trying to desexualize things in schools. He gets K through 3. He extends it to K through 6. He clears out high schools. Then he helps people run for school board while he's running for governor. I've never seen a governor do that before. He helped in 34 races. They won 29 of them. They took over the Miami-Dade School Board. So now people are in place to actually follow through and implement these policies that protect children. That's follow-through.
And
that's a big difference here.
And the tack that DeSantis is taking, I think it's interesting. I think it's probably smart that he announced on Hannity yesterday that he's accepting Gavin Newsom's invitation to debate and use the Newsom California versus
California
DeSantis
versus
Florida as a
oh my gosh!
But I mean, but what's the larger play? Because it seems to me that DeSantis is spinning his wheels, or has been spinning his wheels, partly because he's still searching for a unifying message that's more than just his record in Florida.
Well, first of all, he does have the best chief executive record of anybody in our lifetimes, period, president or governor, in terms of depth and breadth for a conservative. I mean, nobody can touch it. Nobody. And it's really incredible. Now, part of that is because of COVID, it created historic opportunities for contrast. When he stood nearly alone, everybody in the country noticed as he fought supposed experts and so forth. So that's a bit unique. And at the same time, you've got the biggest state, the Golden State, that gets a lot of this attention naturally anyway, visibly going in the toilet on these progressive policies. This is a great right-left opportunity for our movement to showcase the difference between policies that are on the left and policies that are on the right.
I stipulate to all that, but that's really not the question. The question is, how does DeSantis leverage that for a presidential primary campaign? Because, you're going to get a 100% agreement among Republican primary voters, okay, so Florida versus California. Yeah. But the message from, and look, I'm a Florida resident. I'm a fan of DeSantis, huge fan. So, but you also have to look at things and say, well, we're in decline, and I want to reverse it. That is not a value proposition, and I'm just seeing him, in my view, struggle to get beyond what is an excellent record in Florida and nationalize the value proposition of Ron DeSantis as the presidential nominee to Republican primary voters.
Great question. Yes, and nationalizing the vision is part of what he's doing one step at a time. So a few weeks ago, he's in South Carolina, and we'll take the woke battle and the fact that he is the only veteran running for president, the only one on either side of the aisle. And and we all know, those of us who've been paying attention, about the recruitment problems for the military, the readiness problems of the military, and he combined the two. And I think, in a way, with a spectacularly well received in a state that's full of veterans, he turned his experience, both as a veteran in a war zone and as a governor, being the still leading fighter of the woke agenda, all into one national vision for the military. He did combine that with more traditional military commentary as well. So he cast the vision forward. This past week on Monday, he was in New Hampshire rolling out an economic vision that is entirely consistent with what he's accomplished in Florida, and with real goals. He treats it, yes, 3% growth, but what does 3% growth mean in my house? It means that you can afford to raise a family, that you can afford to buy a house. So they are bringing it down to the kitchen table. And I watched Chris Christie's opening town hall back in May, and he had a funny comment for a lady who asked him about a particular issue, and he didn't want to. He said, "Look, I don't want to roll all that out for you now, because I want you to come back to the next one of these." I do.
Well,
so we are 5 months before voting starts, and the three of us are not statistically normal in the degree of attention we pay to this. I do think more attention will start to be paid. It's like Labor Day at the first presidential debate, whether Trump is there or not.
Well,
People
Trump
who
said
haven't yet paid attention will start to pay attention.
Sorry for interrupting, but President Trump said if he doesn't debate, he's going to watch it to see who his running mate might be. And is there any chance that DeSantis would be that person?
No chance. And the Constitution really makes that not literally, but nearly impossible, because if your running mate is from your same state, you can't get the electoral votes from that state. That was the founders' way of spreading around the executive positions to make sure that two people on the ticket wouldn't be from the same state. And the governor of the state isn't moving to become a vice president.
But
and will Trump will move again, to become vice president? Nobody wants Donald Trump as a vice president, and including Donald Trump.
Yeah, no chance.
There's no way Donald Trump.
No.
He's got too much pride for that.
All right,
so.
before we let you go, I mean, I got a lot more questions about the DeSantis campaign and your PAC, but I do want to get to this other deal that
elections.
Election Transparency Initiative, and also what's going on in a key swing state, and that's the state of Georgia, where the otherwise detestable in the minds of MAGA country, Brad Raffensperger, is purging the improper voter registrations from the Georgia voters roll, the registrations that are defunct, which is what secretaries of state and election authorities should be doing. So give us status for people that are very fatalistic about, well, we can't win because we don't have VBM programs. We can't win because the elections are rigged in all these states. And in some states, there's been some market improvements.
Yeah, actually, overall, where we sit today, we're much better off than we were going into the 2020 election. I mean, there are states that are exceptions to that, like Michigan, that step backwards. But in most states, Georgia being the most explosive of them, we have made progress. And by saying most, I mean most swing states. Georgia has had several rounds of election reforms, and they weren't first. Iowa was first, but Georgia is what the left decided to attack, maybe because Stacey Abrams is there. This is where Jim Crow 2.0 cropped up. Even the Washington Post called Joe Biden a four Pinocchios liar over what he was saying about what Georgia was doing. But to their credit, and this is the important part, Georgia pressed ahead and did the reforms anyway. And that's a major difference from previous waves on other issues, is that everybody right of center has stuck together, not just conservatives, to move some of these reforms forward. And one of them, Dan, is cleaning the voter rolls. And they've advanced several ways to do that. They've been doing it. That doesn't mean it isn't controversial when they do it. But when you actually press ahead, and let's tell people what clean the voter rolls means. It means inactive voters, people who haven't voted in a while, come off the voter rolls. Well, what if that person just suddenly decides to vote again? Don't worry, folks. They get to vote. They cast a provisional ballot, and they essentially check the records after the election. And if they are, legitimized as to they are who they say they are and so forth, the vote counts. So, the left doesn't want anybody to know that. They want it to sound like, oh, people's votes are being taken away, they're being wiped off the rolls and so forth. No, but people do die, and people do move out of state, and there is no really good way, from just talk about Georgia, to know that someone has moved out of Georgia. I mean, for those listening who've moved from one state to another, when you left state number 1, did you call the registrar and deregister as a voter?
Right.
No, you didn't.
Right.
You didn't do that.
No,
And
but they disconnected
one thing
their
I would like
candidate.
to see us do on the right is use these private databases that places like Amazon use to determine who can sell things, to determine if they're still living where they living, one, and two, living where the voter rolls say they are, and because they're much more accurate than, say, the national change of address. And we seem insistent on using government to check government records, and the private sector is much better at it.
Ken Cuccinelli, National Chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, former Attorney General, State of Virginia. Ken, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Always good to be with you all. Good to talk to you.
It's a pleasure, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Grubhub Holdings Incorporated seeks site reliability engineer 2 in Chicago.